Another elections, another circus. And understandably, a lot of people are losing hope in our democracy. Too much buduts, too little discussion about substance and policy. So may pag-asa pa ba ang Pilipinas? Absolutely. If you have the right perspective and if you think long-term and learn the right lessons from other democracies or besieged societies. For that, we have two special guests to discuss not only the present, but the future of Philippine democracy and how to make sure magkakaroon tayo ng tunay na bagong mukha sa ating politika. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. Again, this is not a manosphere conspiracy. Nagkataon lang on that short notice, two of you were available. So thank you so much for making time. Obviously, sa gitna tayo ng election ngayon, by the time this recording is out, marami pang ibang developments na mangyari. But I really wanted something more long-term, right? What is the future of Philippine democracy and how can we shape that future in ways that best reflects the interests of the Filipino nation and at the same time, of course, make sure na yung democracy natin is more deepened and it's more robust and mature. The reason I'm also saying that is because recently we had one of the luminaries, Filipino-American luminaries, I think Lloyd Lewis, right? Said something along the lines of, in one of her interviews na she's almost giving up on the country or something like that. Obviously, it was said, I think, in the spur of moment, in an emotional moment. And I can understand, I have many Filipino-American relatives, family members who are depressed, of course, with what's happening in Washington, D.C., in the White House, with what's happening here in the Philippines. But at the same time, I mean, we cannot deny a lot of things that are happening. There's a lot of dynamism that we can talk about. But before we go into the long-term picture, can I ask each of you, gentlemen, what is your understanding of what is at stake in the midterm elections? Dino, can we start with you? As someone who comes from a legal profession and human rights background, what is at stake in the midterm elections this year?
Well, it's very important na hindi tayo bumalik dun sa weaponization of the rule of law, abuse of the justice system, compromising our institutions, and I think that has to be a very clear election issue. And if ever that we don't elect properly, those things will happen again, and that's the greatest fear I think that I don't want, particularly as a human rights advocate, as a lawyer, because alam mo, Richard, nung panahon nung dating administration, parang you want to throw all your law books because institutions don't work. It's easy to weaponize the justice system, as we've seen, and then those people who need the intervention of the justice system, it appears that it's not working because it's easy for you to frighten them. Diba? 66 lawyers, 67 lawyers died within the span of 6 years under the previous administration. So I think that's a very clear election issue. Aside from the fact that we don't want people to be afraid, there was less democratic space during the previous elections. And of course, if ever, as I always say, there is some democratic space right now, but we can go back to that direction, diba? And they're trying to come back. So I think it's a very important election issue, whether or not we want to come back to that dark period wherein we don't have much democratic space.
Well, I mean, just for transparency, I mean, you have been part of the legal team of former Senator Leila de Lima. Everyone, I think, should know by now the kind of injustices she faced. But you're absolutely right to also remind everyone, like in 2019, one of the things we noticed was nahihirapan yung ibang kandidato ng opposition to even campaign dahil takot daw yung mga LGUs to host them. Dahil daw lalagay sila sa narco-politician list. I mean, I do work with the Freedom House. I do write for Journal of Democracy. So sometimes I say, like the data has to reflect that. Actually, in my opinion, in 2019, I cannot call the Philippines an electoral democracy. It's an electoral autocracy, potentially. You can argue that, right? And compared to that, it's quite different, right? Again, things are not perfect. We can criticize the administration. We're going to talk about a lot of those issues, I'm sure, on this platform and others. But the reality is that I think even Senator De Lima used the term democratic space, right? Yeah. There is more room to breathe right
now. And I confirmed that I was a surrogate in 2019 of another senatorial candidate. That's the first time
that I campaigned.
Can you please share? I was a surrogate of former Solicitor General Florin Hilbay. So in his absence, I was the one who was representing him. And when we go to the ground, halos pandirihan ka ng mga mayor, congressmen and governors or sino man. They don't want to be associated with Ocho Derecho during that time. Why? Because titirahin daw sila eh. At ang pananakot pa during that time is papalitan namin yung regional directors mo ng police, for example, lalagyan namin ng killer, yung mga ganyang mga nakakausap namin on the ground. So talagang gigipitin ka if you don't succumb to the will of the national leadership. And yung bruskuhan na gano'n, we don't like that, di ba? At least right now, I confirm that there's more democratic space. We can campaign, we can go to the ground. Local government units have some sort of free will to support the candidates that they want, as opposed to that previous administration, wherein talagang ginipit yung opposition. We don't want that to happen again, hopefully.
Cleve, obviously, machine is always a reality in midterm elections. In Philippines, it tends to be pro-incumbency. Some would even put at the 5 to 10% differential. Na kung admin slate ka, laking chance mo. So the surveys, as we speak, right, as of this recording, already show the dominance of alliance of the administration, and some are expecting that the final results could be even more decisive. So that's nothing new, right? This is something we have seen. Nevertheless, what is your assessment of these midterm elections as it's shaping based on the numbers of your institutions? Because you guys are an analytics, data-driven institution, aside from your role, of course, as a public thinker and academic.
Yes, I think as you've said, what we're seeing in the survey numbers for now is that we expect the midterm elections to continue the trend that we've seen in the past midterm elections, and that means that Malacanang, the administration candidates, has an advantage, right? So we expect, I think, right now it's between 7 to 8 administration candidates to make it by May 2025.
The Senate race.
The Senate race, and that's also at the same level in the past elections. The exception is during the Arroyo years, right?
2007,
Because she was so unpopular, right?
Yeah.
That the administration candidates really were obliterated during the midterm elections, right? But I also think that when we ask the question, ano bang at stake in these midterm elections, and then you said that there are, we have long-term aspirations for Philippine democracy. The good thing about electoral democracies is that the short term is also the long term, right? Parang we work towards winning the elections now because when we replace or when we find good leaders to run our legislature, to run the executive, that's our pathway to also building stronger institutions that contributes to our longer-term goals, right? Kasi building on what Dino has been saying, di ba? I think at the back of the parang ang pinag-iisipan ng ating mga kababayan ngayon, and consistently in survey, it shows that ang tanong is that where do we bring this country, right? In terms of national development, right? They want improvement in their lives, no? And true enough, no? Kung may patayan on the ground, 'di ba? Kung merong patayan in like our in our urban poor communities, no? If legislature cannot freely decide kung anong mahusay na na batas, no, dahil takot sila doon sa nakaupo, halimbawa in the past administration, then it's hard for us to also hit our long-term goals, no. So I think yun, parang this midterm elections, it's and any other elections for that matter is always important and always significant, and I think the silver lining na lang siguro is that as Democrats, because we are in the more challenger status right now, no. Now we're very compelled
or besieged. I think that's besieged.
We're under siege, yes. Now we're compelled to imagine papaano nga ba natin i-mobilize yung ating mga kababayan, no, para doon sa mas the future that we envision, and that demands that we strategize well, we pay attention to the numbers, di ba? And everything else, no. And I also did my personal na academic study nung midterm elections ng 2019 that was under the Duterte administration, and what you have been describing so far, totoo yan in the case studies that we did. Talagang in-depth namin inaral na okay, kung lalaban ka sa administration ni Digong, no, papalitan yung director ng PNP sa iyong lugar, sa iyong probinsya, sa iyong region, no, at ang PNP, yung police na ikokordon yung bahay mo, ikokordon yung buong city hall, no, you can't move, no, and so talagang napakalayo nung situation. If you also talk to our congressmen, kasi inaaral din nung panahon na yan, tinatanong ko din, anong challenges sa paggawa ng batas kapag ka ang presidente mo kagaya ni Digong, no? Anong nangyayari sa Presidential Legislative Liaison Office? Sabi niya, wala nang ganon, wala nang mga PLLO nung panahon na yan, kasi lahat kami takot eh. So then there's no wala masyadong debate, wala masyadong even yung informal na minsan kinakasyon din natin, kahit yung informal na back and forth with Malacanang na kumbaga politician to politician, 'di ba? Congressman to president, parang meron silang mga backdies.
So this was very top down.
Yes.
No pretensions. I mean, we had one Congressman Roman, for instance, said that abstention was not even an option.
Yes.
Because I said a lot of us were critical of you voting in favor of certain laws that we felt goes against everything you're supposed to. Sabi niya, even abstention, there will be a cost to that.
Yeah.
Ganyan yung level. And I want to go back to this because this short-term, long-term kind of dialectics, diba? Obviously, a lot of midterms is also to determine the parameters of possibility for the legacy years of the president, because it's really in the last 2 years or so you can get the big infrastructure projects, the legislation that you need to get things going. But obviously, the other short-term, long-term here is, first of all, let's not forget there's another Duterte also in the mix here, who's the vice president, who's in line, who could be the next president if, God forbid, anything happens to the president. And as we speak, right, again, as of this recording, there's a lot of back and forth on the issue of Sara impeachment. I mean, I think it was, maybe for the first time I agree really with the senator. Coco Pimentel said something like, only in the Philippines it takes a month to interpret the meaning of one single word, forthwith. As a lawyer, what is your understanding of forthwith, and what is your understanding of the current Senate leadership's understanding of forthwith, which seems to contradict what a lot of constitutionalists believed in?
I just want to say, it's just really disappointing for the current Senate President it looks like he's abdicating his oath, diba? The oath is to preserve and defend the Constitution. That's the oath of office of public officers, diba? And it's very clear in the Constitution na after the transmittal, the Senate will forthwith convene as an impeachment court. Forthwith in basic English, ang tawag namin dyan lawyers is verba lehis, right? Is immediately and without delay. Hindi naman sinabi doon na at the convenience of the senators when they want it, right?
Or kung may public clamor. Wala daw public clamor.
Oo. Well, the clamor is unnecessary for you to do your duty. Because that is a duty, di ba? If we are called to do something and it's our duty, we do it, di ba? We don't need the clamor. It's your public duty. So forthwith is immediate. And that's very clear. Now, there are a lot of issues that they're throwing, di ba? Maggagawa pa ng rules, right? E di convene mo na ngayon, gumawa na kayo ng rules. Bakit doon pa kayo sa June, July, magagawa ng rules next Congress? The next question na sinasabi nila, we're on break, right? Ibig sabihin ba, pushing your logic, pag-break ang Senate, hindi na pwedeng mag-hold accountable ng any impeachable officers.
Right.
Let's remember that impeachment is under public accountability section of the 1987 Constitution. What does that mean? It means na separate siya from legislative.
Right.
Okay? Public accountability, separate article. Legislative, separate article. What's on break is the legislative calendar. But impeachment is an accountability mechanism separate and distinct from the roles of the senators in legislating. Right? In other words, magkaiba yan and separate yan. So what's on break is the legislative session. But the Senate is a continuing body. All jurisprudence already recognized na wala pa ni isang jurisprudence sabi hindi yan continuing body. That means that they can convene anytime, even if they're on break, di ba? Unlike, let's say, for example, the House of Representatives, which is not a continuing body, the Senate is a continuing body. And why is it that we're certain, no? What are the indications na separate talaga yung impeachment trial or impeachment from that of the legislative body? Di ba magte-take pa sila ng separate oath? Yung mga senators, before they become senator judges, they will take a separate oath to become senator judges. That's first. Second, magbe-wear sila ng attire. Right? Third, they will not use the legislative rules. They will use impeachment rules. Right?
Yeah.
So these are all indications that these are separate and distinct functions. And it's not an excuse na naka-break kasi yung Senate. Ang duty, kaya nga forthwith, is to convene immediately and without delay. It is unfortunate that the Senate President Chis Escudero is actually skirting the issue and sa akin, remiss in his duty to uphold and defend the Constitution.
But there was the Senate President cited the precedence of the Arab case, and supposedly, I mean, she's no longer around to explain her case, but Miriam Defensor's legal approach to the understanding of impeachment. What do you have to say about that?
Well, if my recollection is correct, hindi na-delay ng ganyang katagal just because Congress is on break, no? It's true, you have to do your rules, kailangan nyo intindihin yung quantum of evidence required. Some people say in the there, and I don't always agree with Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago when it comes to her legal analysis, di ba? Ang sabi niya is, ano bang quantum of evidence required here? Sabi niya, it has to be higher than preponderance of evidence, di ba? Right. Overwhelming preponderance of evidence yata yung proof niya, but lower than proof beyond reasonable doubt. Some other legal luminaries say this is quasi-judicial, quasi-political, right? That means that hindi ganun kataas yung threshold.
The quantum should be different.
Yes,
the threshold
yes. And there is no set standard for that, no? Even academics debate that. But even if we debate that, you convene first so that we can debate that. In other words, saying that there are things that we must settle first, even more so, that calls for the convening of the impeachment court. Diba? Para mapag-usapan natin itong mga to, hindi siya yung parang marami pa kailangan gawin na housekeeping and therefore hindi pa kami pwede mag-start. No, i-convene mo na so that we can start the ball rolling.
You study in Georgetown, you're familiar with the US. Of course, a lot of our jurisprudence takes precedence on what is U.S. precedence?
Well,
how is it relevant to us, if in case? Because ang dami lang naging impeachment. Trump pala.
But very similar lagi is if there is a call for accountability, which is the core of the Constitution. Remember, the Constitution is a social contract, right? And it is the highest law of the land because it's the contract of the public with the state and with the government, diba? And it's not, it's the other way around. We always say that the reason why they are in power is because the people said so, right? And the Constitution does not define, right? Does not prevent the people from, they did not cede their rights, right? Instead, they actually define the role of government. In other words, the moment that the people would want to extract accountability from their public officers, dapat yun yung primary thing that must be upheld because it's a constitution. It defines the limits of the power of government and it's the sovereign will of the people. And core dyan lagi is accountability, which is the reason why the Constitution was created. It's about accountability because the people is sovereign, right? It's the people who should be respected. And when the moment na nagtapatawag sila ng accountability through their representatives, that must be respected.
Cleve, balikan kita because not long ago you released a set of surveys. Some of our colleagues and friends were not very happy with it in terms of some had methodological issue, but some of them were like, why do we need even to release this? Because this should not be a clamor issue, right? As very eloquently laid out by Dino here. But why did you feel you have to come out with that survey? And what is your response to some of the methodological concerns that were raised? Again, as social scientists, this is, I think, legitimate discussion, right? Yeah.
Right. What I see is that part ng accountability mechanism is also figuring out anong tingin ng mga kababayan natin sa usapin na ito. And I think it's not surprising. I think parang the surprise is that why is the official that was just impeached, the vice president, has this support, diba? But it's not surprising if you contextualize it that a while ago she was elected, right? Now we are saying that merong misuse of funds, diba? Merong incompetence in the time as the Secretary of Education, for example, and other allegations against the Vice President, right? And I think the idea is that public opinion is part of that mechanism then, di ba? Na kaya I agree with Dino na convene the court, the impeachment court. Kasi yung taong bayan, how do we now then deliberate with them, right? Kasi on a theoretical level nga, what I think about this is that yung impeachment kasi it's not subject to, it's not at the end of the day a popular mechanism, di ba? Hindi to sinong sikat, sinong hindi.
Right? It's not a plebiscite, yeah.
At napakahalaga nun kasi by design, ganun yung liberal democratic institutions natin, di ba? Kasi may tinatawag tayo na majoritarian excesses, right? Yeah. Pag nagpa-survey kami at sinabi namin, dapat ba ikulong si Dino de Leon ngayong araw na ito, tapos walang legal basis, and then 99% nag-yes, tama ba yon? Hindi, right? But malaki yung difference between that's the state of public opinion versus this is the last word on this particular issue. And I think na yun nga galing from that context na inelect natin siya, ngayon nag-aantay yung ating taong bayan, 'di ba? What are the cases that are to be made against the vice president?
I mean, your surveys were important, right? In a sense that the more specific the question became, the more people were undecided, which
Yes.
means they deserve to see these issues,
Correct.
Prosecuted or litigated, right? So actually, the increasing propensity for parang uncertainty of the voters based on your survey is actually a clarion call na Senate should do its duty so that people can also understand what is at stake, di ba? Kasi syempre technical, these are very difficult technical
Yes,
issues.
Let's remember that the supporters, assuming, di ba, that tama, popular pa rin si Inday Sara, di ba, who was just impeached. Let's remember that this particular impeachment trial is also a forum for
So just to
them.
be clear, she's already impeached.
She's
kasi
already impeached,
This is
right?
an impeachment trial because people don't understand.
Yes,
Akala
yes.
nila
Yeah.
kung wala pang
Oo.
trial, hindi pa impeached
she's
na siya.
impeached. She's
We're talking about the
impeached.
trial
Yes,
now.
trial. So she's already impeached. Pero sinasabi popular pa rin. Fine, right? Fine. The forum of the impeachment trial is also for them. Di ba? Kung wala ka naman palang ginawa, di clear out your name. Lagi nila sinasabi yan nung panahon ni
Panahon nila, di ba?
Kung wala
kayong
ka naman
ikakatago,
takot,
Yeah.
di ba?
Kumakatok lang naman yung pulis doon sa pintuan mo kahit na 600
Yun
yung
yung
mamatay
tokang
sa
logic.
araw o 90 or 100. Wala kayo dapat ikatakot, right?
Kung wala kayong
Kasi kung gano'n naman pala, bilisan na natin yung impeachment trial. Bakit pa sila, ang dami pa nilang questions, di ba? Ultimately, it's an avenue for them to also clear their name. So, good. Kung mas maraming supporters, fine. Let the institutions take its place.
And I think parang isa din sa mga ni-raise namin is that if you look at the breakdown, 'di ba? Parang a large part of those who are for now not supportive of the impeachment are coming from the stronghold of the Dutertes, right? So pwede din kasi as a political observers, this can be the initial response, 'di ba?
Yeah.
Parang halimbawa, anak
You mean
mo,
visceral lang?
anak mo,
Yeah.
pinatawag ng principal, sabi suspend, i-expel kasi bully. Anong una mong response? Ang una mo bang response ay grabe naman yung anak ko? Hindi, di ba? Parang medyo, nako, hindi naman siguro, no? Kasi you have this affinity, di ba?
Yeah.
Matagal-tagal na din at tinakot din nila yung taong bayan dyan, di ba? So, may ganong affinity. Pero, yung trial ay, kagaya ng hearing, di ba? Sa eskwelahan, right? Ay, nakita naman pala bully pala yung anak mo pinagsasapak yung kaklase,
Yeah.
ninanakawan yung kaklase.
Nakita yung
Di ba?
ebidensya na.
And what would be the parents' response, di ba? Usually, ang response na dyan, ma'am, sige po, i-suspend
Pasensya
niyo po
na.
kasi hindi natututo.
Pasensya.
Pagka hindi pa po natuto, please expel my yung anak ko, di ba? And I think yun yung mahalaga. And then so with all due respect to our parang friends din in the legal profession, no, di ba? Na ito nga nagdedebate sila doon sa fourth wheel. I think kailangan din nating ayun nga sa level ng public opinion maganda at itatanong namin sa sunod na survey, di ba? At hindi ako magdududa na I think isa sa mga idedemand ng ating mga kababayan ay umpisahan na yan. Because if right now they're unsure, if right now some of them supports, some of them against, right? I think they would appreciate na makonvene na yung impeachment court, right? Merong mga discussion, yun nga, natututo ako doon sa jurisprudence on forthwith, di ba? Pero ako, I think lang din the story for ordinary people is that kung may allegation ng halimbawa na lang, misuse of funds, hindi naman ako tumitigil magbayad ng buwis dahil naka-break kayo o dahil hindi nyo tumaaksyonan.
Right.
Wala naman I have no choice,
Sumasahod
right?
pa rin naman
Sumisweldo sila.
Sumisweldo, yun na
Napakalaking
Tuloy ang
sweldo.
sahod, tuloy ang buhay.
Ano yun? Sumisweldo ka, tapos wala kang duty. Ayaw mo gawin yung constitutional duty mo.
And I think broadly kaya din empower yung halimbawa yung mistrust sa rule of law natin is that kapag ganyan kabagal yung accountability mechanism, di ba? Kaya nga sinasabi natin lagi sa ating mga members ng court din, di ba? You have to solve the problem on slow trials, di ba? Kasi nahihirapan magtiwala yung taong bayan, 'di ba? So right now actually I think it's also on the Senate President, no? Kapag pinatagal pa to and then people will start thinking na nako, hindi na ata to katiwa-tiwala na proseso, parang tinulugan na just like any other kinasuhan.
Pero mahalaga
diba?
yung sinasabi mong Cleve kasi ako ang pag-intindi ko, how did we go from Jovito Salonga to X, Y, and Z and potentially even worse in the next Congress in terms of the circus?
Meron pa bang worse?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
It's a
in the next
bottomless
Congress. Bibigyan ka ng jacket.
without naming names, I'm just saying it will get even more interesting.
Okay.
Ako kasi ang pag-intindi ko from a compassionate point of view is, unang-una, marami sa ating kababayan, baka pati nga tayo, hindi natin naintindihan yung mga Latin legalist debate. Naalala ko yung back in the day, ang sarap pakinggan. Pero masarap pakinggan kung yung archaic English nila ay na-appreciate mo or yung legal, una. Pangalawa, I think a lot of people also don't appreciate ano ba mga duties ng senador. Kanina, you reminded, hindi lang duty nila mag-legislate. They have to fiscalize. Pero pangatlo, it's also this. Hearing ng hearing, wala rin naman nangyari. So, kaya hindi ko rin may sisi yung ating mga kababayan na hindi yan, ay entertainment lang pala. So let's literally put entertainers na lang there in the Senate because even the legal minds there are more looking for their political. I mean, let's be honest. A big part of why it took us 1 month to interpret or misinterpret pa rin the fourth week is marami senador siguro takot sila na if they vote against Sara or they even seem to be voting against Sara or vote for procedures that could expose Sara, they will pay the price with solid South base. And remember, in the Senate, the margins are very thin from number 8 to 12. Baka laban na lang niya ng few 100,000 votes, if not few millions, right? So you cannot afford to lose. So I'm trying to look at, this is how broken the system is, whereby hindi mo na maasahan yung mga institution to do their job because everyone is looking for the political interest and people they keep on seeing hearing after hearing after hearing that is not leading to anything. Dino, are you worried that if after all those months of Quadcom hearings, if walang mangyari sa impeachment issue na yan and this keeps on getting kicking the can down the road and worse, it ends in like ganyan lang yung trial, that it may completely undermine faith of people in the Senate and the role of the legislature.
In the Senate.
If not the democracy at
In the justice system, yun yung pinaka, I always say, I think, and I'll name names, alam mo naman ako, di ba? The Tulfors are very popular right now, right? And the reason why they're very popular, I always say, it's because it's an indication of how tired the people are with the justice system. Right? Yung kawalan ng hustisya yan eh. Kasi bakit? Imbis na sabihin nila, idedemanda kita. Ano na yung verb na nga eh. Itutulfo kita. It's all because our institutions kept on failing those people who need these institutions to work. And especially the justice system. Diba? So ngayon, hindi na tulfo na, hindi na idedemanda kita, hindi na nga ipababarangay kita, ipapatulfo kita, tsaka kikilos yung mga bagay-bagay. And of course, if how do institutions work, diba? Chicken and egg rin naman yan. But it's also the people who make it work, right? So if we are, as a people, we're gonna be tired of defending our institutions, then it will never work. That's why, pardon me, but I admire Senator Cleve de Leon there, and that's why I volunteered as her lawyer, because she knew that the justice system was mistreating her, maltreating her, definitely being weaponized against her, but she underwent the entire thing, diba? The entire process. Why? Because she respects the institution. And she knows for a fact na the institution will only work if we will be participants. It's like democracy, diba? Democracy is a never-ending experiment. But we can only strengthen democracy if we will always participate in the democratic process and will try to make it work. So I understand, maraming pagod yung mga kababayan natin, ang daming parang ayaw na. Pero it's the only country that we have, and it's only the only justice system that we have. I remember a podcast that I did in Rappler. That's the thing that I said. And what's next for the justice system? Hindi ka ba tired? Ito yung panahon nung I filed the Mandamos case against President Duterte, which was just cursory dismissed by the Supreme Court. But I said it's the only justice system that I have, and I have to make it work. So the bottom line is, I think democracy is participative. Nakakapagod kasi yung na rin, di ba? Laging tinikuha yung agency from the people eh. Didiktahan ka kung sino iboboto mo. Gusto natin ng mga diktador. What we don't understand is, I think, yung kamay na bakal na yan relies on a strong man, di ba? Yung nag-iisang tao eh. Pero for us to have a better country, we're all participants eh. And we have to make sure that we vote well, we make institutions work. Even if it fails, we constantly try to make it work. Hindi siya overnight thing. And nakakapagod, pero hindi rin pwedeng instant eh. Otherwise, the next generation of leadership will be laging naghahanap tayo ng instant thing, which I think is bad for democracy.
Well, I think this is a perfect segue to really the meat of discussion here, which is where does this leave the just call them the umbrella term, genuine opposition. Because the Dutertes are positioning themselves as opposition, pero ang tawag ko dyan, naging opposition lang dahil nawalan ng position.
Rule of law na bigla.
Yeah.
Rule of law na raw sila.
Anti-dictator.
Free speech.
Constitutionalist din.
People power. No, but putting that aside, I mean, the term opposition has been so abused that some opposition candidates are saying, no, we're just independents, like Bam Aquino, right? It's like, sa sobrang na-adulterate yung term na opposition. No, but speaking of genuine opposition, meaning people who are basically never Duterte or never Marcos or both, right? Obviously, the past 3 elections were not very encouraging, right? Well before Europe had its far-right crisis, well before U.S. Democrats went into the depression mode, we were already going through that in the Philippines. Nevertheless, my sense 2028 could be very open. Sara impeach or not, I don't think Duterte's will be the kind of inevitable force, kind of a force field that they have been. The Tulfos will obviously always be part of the equation for reasons that you explained, this kind of penal populist appeal and this macho Filipino leader appeal. And I think Senator Raffy Tulfo, in fairness to him, has so far done pretty good, much better than expectation of a lot of people. Hindi ko na alam sa mga kapatid niya later sa Senate, we can talk about that. And then going back to this, nevertheless, you know, Riza Ontiveros, the first social democrat, socialist, progressive, whatever you call it, who made it to Senate. Her hearings are the only hearings I can recall that actually ended in something concrete, right? Si Guo Hopping, yung pala AKA lang pala siya na Alice Go, right? Nawala ng passport. Ngayon, na-expose pa as potentially asset of MSS of China. Kiboloy, who would have thought, right?
Yes.
So,
Head of Pogo.
so, ito, you're seeing some green shoots here and there. Lenny is coming back as a political force. You can see everyone's trying to go and pay respects to her. So she has now the luxury of even being more nationally present, right? Because halos sigurado na siya in terms of going back to Naga, in terms of making Naga great again, right? So, and then you have LGU stars like Vico Soto and many others that people are not aware of. But actually, if you scratch the surface, so many young new LGU champions, change makers, I call them, are coming up. This 2025 looks very hard for the genuine opposition, right? For just the basic reason all the resources that we're talking about are basically divided between 2, and it's not even symmetrical, right? Having said that, do you see a chance for at least 1 senator from the opposition or 2 senators making? How important is it for the genuine opposition to at least get 1 kakampi for Risa para lang? And is it possible for the opposition to still build a stronger future even if they really get another disappointing result, just like 2019, if not 2022? Because we're in the middle of this. These are historic moments of, at the same time, you can be very depressed about the prospects for opposition, but also you can be very optimistic about hindi lang democratic space, but actually electoral and political space.
Yeah, I think arithmetically, di ba? Pag tinignan natin, kung tinignan natin na divided na yung puwersa ng kadiliman sa puwersa ng kasamaan. Di ba? Arithmetically lang, di ba? Parang
Let's just call it the 2 biggest dynasties going against each other. Right?
Yeah, di ba? Parang then that opens the playing field, right? That means na the barrier to parang the numbers that you need to be able to win, whether that's a Senate seat or you know, a local chief executive position, no, ideally, diba, that has lowered down, and that's more attainable, no, to a force that's trying to build itself up again. Secondly, I think yes, there are challenges, pero actually tingin ko napaka-important ng midterm elections na to na yung opposition has started to experiment, and to me that's a really good sign. That's the willingness and openness to embrace the difficulty of building opposition from the ground up, right? I think that kasi I think the past mga electoral cycles, merong mode na naku, baka panandalian lang naman tong challenge natin, kaya we can do what we have been doing in the past and then try to win the support of the people. Pero ngayon, no, some of us will go the party list route. Some of us will do local chief executive position, and then may magsi-Senate, right? For example, kung we're talking about opposition candidates, in the WR numero survey, nasa magic 40 na namin, no? In statistical tie, no? Si Kiko and si Bam, diba?
Right.
And so I think may
competitive. They're competitive
yes,
candidates.
may opening diba? Na ganito, no? So it's not like hope is lost, right? Pero I think the next question is that is this the only way that we can do it, 'di ba? Marami pa tayong mga kakaharapin na sana halimbawa ako yung aking laging sinasabi no na no matter how difficult but the party building will always be an immediate no na kailangan at i-take on ng democratic forces.
Gusto kong pag-usapan yan, Cleve, kasi dito sa Pilipinas, parati natin pinag-usapan, ito yung ginawa ng Democrats, yung mga ibang more pretentious katulad naman, ito yung ginawa nila sa France, or sa Germany, or Scandinavia. Pero para sa akin, the ones that we actually have to look at are very similar global South countries, and you can just look at Thailand. Obviously, Thailand is at best electoral autocracy, if you want to be honest about it. The military and the monarchy are basically calling the shots. Nevertheless, you saw future forward, move forward. I don't know anong latest iteration nila. They're just throwing the punches, right? Like, you get knocked down, they come back. I mean, PETA, their latest iteration leader, won the most votes. They dominated Bangkok. And Thailand is not a rich country. Their per capita is not too far from us. So under very difficult conditions, a youth-driven, even very, very progressive values, almost made it. Practically should have made it if not for being sabotaged, right? By yung Team Kadiliman at kasama nila, di ba? What is the lesson for us? If a 40-year-old guy in Thailand can make it almost to the Prime Minister office, and it's not the end of the story. There are others. Their bench is so deep, eh. I mean, PETA is just like the second disqualified top leader of this party. They have like 3 or 4 more. I'm talking to her. You did comparative Philippine-Thailand populism when you were based in Australia as a scholar. Can you tell me what are the lessons from we can learn from Thailand?
Yeah.
Given that our ceiling is actually way higher. Thank God we don't have an absolute monarchy or crazy king. We don't have a military that is coup plotting every 2 days. We have a space that they didn't have or will never have probably. So ano yung mga lessons natin, Cleve?
Yeah, I think it's very, very inspiring story. I think I want to start by saying na they went from like a zero, like a nothing party, hindi sila part ng party system, right? And then became the second biggest party and eventually the biggest party in just two electoral cycles, no? Kaya yung ating mga kababayan na nahihirapang imagine na kaya pa ba natin to, it's all a matter of illusion, it's all a matter of perception, right?
Yeah.
Kaya yan, no? But I think the key to some of the successes that they've had, studying them, no, doing field work in Thailand as well, has something to do with really behaving as a party, no? Ito nga isa sa mga tanong ko. I know that some of us in the big opposition family no nung mga nakarang eleksyon, meron naman sigurong nagbibilang ng boto, 'di ba? Pero a party is really disciplined.
Right.
On the day of the election, 'di ba? The party machine, and by machine baka ini-imagine nyo mga ano to, no?
Organized people.
At mga kabataan, 'di ba?
Yes.
Mga kabataan, no? They know in their villages, no, na na-assign sa kanila, alam nila yung kung sino yung i-invite nilang pumunta sa presinto because they know who their supporters are in those villages. Right?
Ganon yung intel gathering level.
Ganon ka data-driven. If you go to their headquarters, you see that they have talagang specific maps of
so they have a screen as big as this and everything will break
villages,
down.
Diba?
Exactly.
And kaya yung question ko halimbawa, no, I know that we had this very inspiring pink movement as well, right?
Yeah.
But how many of our volunteers have been mobilized to count votes on election day? Because yun yung nagmamatter bilangan to ng boto, election to, di ba? Not just, so may ganung may yung parang party discipline. I think we need to adopt a lot of that. Secondly, also the platform of Move Forward and Future Forward eventually is as ambitious as you can get. If you look If you look for their principles, they're not just promising that they will fight for democracy in Thailand, that they will remove the influence of monarchy, kaya nga sila na-disqualify kasi they're willing to say what is supposedly unsayable in Thai politics, right? Sasabihin nila, hindi, kasi yung monarchy nakikialam sa politika, that's the problem, and they're willing to say that.
And also like income issues, universal
I was
basic,
about to say, it's not just they're promising democracy, economically ambitious sila. They're promising people that when they get into government, tataas ng minimum na sahod. Ito yung social services na ibibigay namin. I think at one point they're trying to they're trying to come up with a policy how to make parang some levels of internet access free and universal, also healthcare. And I think we're also ready for that kind of
And they
mission,
use
diba?
TikTok and social media very effectively. Taksin was very impressed
Which
by
I think is parang the
Yeah.
last lesson that I've learned from them is
Yeah.
that it's driven by a lot of people, a lot of young people, no? Yun din yung isang inspiring kasi kagaya ng lagi ko nga sinasabi kasi ngayon panahon na naman ng voters education, in-invite tayo, 'di ba? Na sabi ko, magsawa na tayo sa voters education. I think dapat ang sabihin natin, tumakbo ka.
Or maybe
Tumatakbo
we should
eh.
do the voters' education in a way that is directly relevant to the electoral race and more engaging. It's not me educating you, right?
Alam mo, some of the candidates na napanalo ng Move Forward, university student, nag-register sa probinsya nila, umuwi ng SEM break, nangampanya, and then won against kasi parang tayo din naman, meron silang malalaking mga dynasties, mga warlords,
Yeah,
mga local lords, right? But I think it's also yung the idea na it can be done, no? And we can
It can
win
be
this.
done even under more difficult circumstances. In many ways, I see Thailand even like PITA outdoing even what Macron did, right? Remember when Macron won on March, he brought like mathematicians, the top like professors were joining his party and they made it. Dino, wag ka mahiya. I know this is close to your heart. What do you want to see in the next few years and hopefully decade in terms of mobilizing a new generation of Filipino leaders?
Exactly. I want to tie all the learnings kasi
Ganda, di ba? I mean, it's very inspiring. The
Saka
Thai
sana
case.
naman we learn too, right? I was very close I was heavily engaged in the 2022 campaign. We were all heartbroken. But after we were heartbroken, what happens next? Diba? And I think in order for us to be able to introduce long-term solutions, we have to be capable of introspection. No? So we have to criticize ourselves. We're at fault, and these are some of the things that I was able to observe. No? Number one, I feel like, of course, we mobilized too late. Diba? And in order for you to win, tandaan natin yung mga kalaban na anti-democratic forces who hack the system, they move deliberately and by design.
Yeah.
So that's the first learning, no? I think we have to move deliberately and by design. Hindi pwedeng, because
Bara-bara
success
yun.
is deliberate and by design, no? Hindi pwedeng, bahala na po, tapos magdadasal po tayo, we keep the
Truth
faith.
shall prevail.
Truth shall prevail in the
Transparency.
end.
The arc of history will be.
No, we have to be deliberate and by
Yeah.
design. When I say deliberate and by design, both tactical and principle-wise, we have to align. And we have to have a short-term plan and medium-term plan and a long-term plan. Ano nangyayari sa ating mga leaders right now? And again, lahat tayo dito to blame, diba? The decide, di ba? Na parang hindi pa ako sure, ganyan. Pati yung parties. Dapat yung political parties who are disciplining them, walang training, di ba? Walang making sure that the next generation of leaders will be there. In fact, a lot of our political parties don't have next generation of leaders, right? Which is why I think hindi deliberate and by design. And the democratic forces can only win if we're going to be deliberate and by design. That's first. The second thing that I want to say is, the moment that we've decided, we have to keep our eyes on the ball. Ang problema kasi, and this is honest, the last 6 months, nung nangangampanya na, alam mo, even inside, ang daming super infighting, ang daming magtatampo. Mga kampanyador pa sa mga regions, di ba, na parang one faction, Lenny faction A, Lenny People's Council, di ba? Yung mga ganyan. Tapos meron ding, dito yung ibang...
Too many cooks.
Too many cooks.
Yeah.
Tapos, after nyan, nag-aaway at nagtatampo. Sino ba kalaban natin dito, di ba? So, I mean...
pettiness.
And we have to be a little bit
Petty-factionalism.
more mature. We have to settle that. And I think that's in Thailand. I'm sure, in the mobilization, ang dami rin nilang debates. Pero after the debate, keep your eyes on the bigger picture and on the ball. Right? And you have to make sure that you go beyond the pettiness. Di ba? Kasi lagi namang merong mga ganyan. Pero if you don't go beyond it, tatawa ng tatawa yung mga kalaban natin. And finally, very important, no? We have to have a next generation already. And I always say this, di ba? Nag-aantay kasi tayo ng kumpas sa taas eh. Lagi. And I think that is the political structure. Clear na ba ni ganyan? Clear na ba ni ganyan? Di ba? It's not my style, right? And my principal, that's the reason why I stayed with my principal when I was campaigning, is precisely because hindi ako binigyan niya ng script. Hindi ako pinagbawalan niya. Nang-iisipin ko lang every single time na pupunta ako sa stage is, ano bang tama?
Yeah.
Hindi ako binigyan ng script, and hindi rin ako pinatahimik kahit na anong criticism kasi yun tama at that point in time. In fact, may mga taong sinasabi na wag yata masyadong sharp. Diba? Even within the campaign, wag masyadong sharp. And then ang sinasabi ko, nakakulong yung principal, si Laila
Yeah.
de Lima.
Yeah.
And she stood up for these principles, right? And in the end, hanggat hindi ako po pinapatahimik ni Senator Laila de Lima, ito yung sasabihin ko, ikikwento ko yung story niya, I will call a spade a spade. And Laila never said, tama na. Diba? Yun talaga eh, yun yung character. And it's us stepping up, I think, and it's gonna be our generation, right, who should be doing this, just like what happened in Thailand,
Yeah.
right? Hindi na nag-aantay ka ng kumpas sa taas. Tama na yun. Lumang tugtugin na yun. And we're already of age. So I think the next generation has to be the ones to mobilize, not just for 2025, not just for 2028. It has to be 2031, 2034, and beyond, 2035, until 2040, that I think we owe it up to the country, our generation, to plan that until 2040. Then afterwards, hopefully, diba, next generation naman. But it's gonna be us who should be doing that now.
Yung totoong bagong mukha.
Without
naming names. Thank you very much, Dino, for that clarion call. Thank you very much, Cleve, for that very inspiring case of Thailand. I keep on going back to the Thailand case because I think it puts our generation, older millennials and millennials, into shame because they're already running for prime minister in other countries or presidents, right? So we're behind the curve, which is shocking for quite an old democracy by Asian standards. So it's really catch-up time. And when you look around and you see no one is doing what has to be done, you have to do it yourself. So that's a very good way of putting it. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify and YouTube. I'm Richard Haydarian, and that was A View from Manila. We're One News, all sides, all the time.